Welcome everyone. Today it's the third session in the workshop course on smart cities, and today's session will be moderated by Gaurav Dwivedi. As you know, he was a speaker yesterday. He's the associate director of Center for Financial Accountability. Gaurav has done his work primarily on water sector reforms and associated issues with it, in which he has looked deeply into special purpose vehicles, PPPs, etc. He has written a couple of articles both at global and national journals regarding water sector reforms and, of course, on PPPs. For the last few years, he has also been working mostly on infrastructure finance, the reforms in the said area, looking into smart cities, industrial corridors, and the like. So today's session will be moderated by Gaurav, and over to you, Gaurav. And before handing it over to Gaurav, we have sent the presentations of session 1 and session 2 in the Google Drive. We have uploaded it there, and we'll be uploading the recordings shortly. So you can access those recordings and presentations from the Google Drive. Thank you, and over to you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Maju. Thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to all of the listeners, viewers here who have been very actively participating in these conversations around smart cities and very engaging discussions, at least in the last couple of sessions that we have. So I think the last two sessions have set a foundation of discussing broadly about urbanization, urban planning, how it evolved over a period of years, especially in the context of this country in India. And now moving forward, we'll look at some of the issues in details, specifically related to urban governance and financing and other aspects, so especially in the context of the smart cities mission that we have. Today's session that we are going to focus on is on governance and various issues that are coming up with this mission being implemented across the country. There were already several kind of aspects to urban governance, starting from the 74th Constitutional Amendment, where the municipal bodies form the third tier of the overall democratic structure that we have in the country. But also relating to people's participation, how citizens can actively, participate into many of the decision-making processes, the role of the municipal bodies in delivering those governance mechanisms. So many of these things, I think, would come up for discussion in today's session, and we have a very kind of learned and a speaker who's done a lot of work on these issues. So today's discussion would be led by Bhargavi Rao. Just give me a few minutes to introduce Bhargavi. Bhargavi is a colleague at CFA. She's the deputy director. She's worked at the intersections of community action with law, policy, planning, and governance. 5 years of experience across research, advocacy, campaign, and teaching on variety of human rights, governance, and people-centered efforts, especially in the areas of environmental and social justice. She has worked with Public Health Foundation of India, Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiative, and the Environment Support Group. She was the co-director of International Honors Program, the Boston University, and Minnesota Studies in International Development, University of Minnesota. And she's taught as faculty in many programs, local educational institutions, and also engaged with corporates in many of these issues. She has contributed several research papers in leading science journals, chapters to books, articles in magazines, and many other dailies. Uh, so we have Bhargavi, who has worked in multiple sectors and on multiple issues. Uh, and I think she will bring a lot of points for discussion and debate in this session. Uh, More importantly, because I think governance forms a very important component of the overall democratic structure that we have. And especially with the focus on the urban areas, governance forms a very important component. So, with this brief, I would hand it over to Bhargavi now for the begin this discussion. Just to remind you all, please keep your microphones on silent. Again, it would be a request to, if you can switch on your videos so that we know who all are, you can see your faces to know who all are participating. Uh, any questions, comments, please put them in the chat box. When the discussion is over or the presentation is over, we will take up the questions, comments in the later part of the session. Thank you so much and warm welcome to all of you. Bhargavi, can you please start?
Thank you, Gaurav, and good morning, everyone. So for today's session, what I have thought of is I will walk through with some of the challenges that we are facing in most of our cities. The case studies that I'm going to be sharing with you are just indicative of some of the challenges that all our cities are facing. And feel free to stop and share some of the similar issues each of you are facing in your own cities. And then as we move, we will discuss a little bit about the 74th Amendment and the provisions of the 74th Amendment as touched upon by Gaurav yesterday. And then also look at how parastatals play a big role. And then now the smart city that is come into focus. So in this very broad landscape, governance seems to be failing, and what could be the next way forward are also things that we need to think of. So that is what I have planned. And like I said, please feel free to stop me and share your thoughts, and we could even make it interactive and have a discussion too. And yes, your questions can come in the chat box and we'll take it up. If we just look at what has happened in the last few years in our cities, this is something very recent, the picture that you see here. Bangalore has been receiving a lot of rains, and the city was like flooded about a month back. And this in a very elite neighborhood, especially, which is called the Manyata Tech Park area in North Bangalore. And the entire city and the connecting roads to this neighborhood were blocked. And there are a couple of lakes close by. The lakes were overflowing. Fishes were literally swimming on these roads and even came into some of the homes and offices, as per newspaper reports. And many of the security guards were found catching fish on the streets of Bangalore. Similar stories have been happening. These have been issues that are happening over the last few decades here in Bangalore. And this is something to do with planning, something to do with how we've managed our lakes, how we have managed our construction. And there is this increasing challenge of pouring concrete and cement and tar in our cities in the context of development. And this is what has resulted. Then you have the Hyderabad scenario, which is less than a week old, where we saw people and vehicles being washed away. And here was a scenario where about 50 people died. Then we all saw what happened when the lockdown started. Cities have been places where migrants have come over the last few decades because we are continuing to build and build and build. Like I said, there's so much of mining of sand and granite and manufacture of cement that is happening, and all of that is coming into our cities, and which is providing labor. And when these people are here, there are no laws and policies that are governing them. There is no documentation, and access to public health, housing, education, or even justice seems to be a far cry for these people. And cities continue to expand beyond imagination. And this pandemic especially opened this big Pandora box full of dilemmas of our cities and how they have been governed over the last few decades. And then in Bangalore, about 10 years ago, there was a major fire incident. And at that time, the police issued a directive that all buildings check their building bylaws, and if there are violations, action has to be taken, so on and so forth. But we are like exactly 10 years after this fire incident, and our apartment complexes, housing continue to violate the basic building bylaws. Some of the roads don't even have enough width to accommodate a fire engine, and the safety standards remain very, very poor, despite judicial scrutiny and directives from the police department. And another very interesting scenario. So Bangalore got its international airport in 2008. So the land acquisition started sometime around 2000, 2002. And what happened was the first runway, today we have a second runway as well. The first runway is actually sitting on a village called Arshin Kunte. And this particular village was evicted in the monsoon of 2003 or 4. And these people were given a very poor compensation of some 5 lakhs or so for their land, but they were not compensated or rehabilitated properly in the context of their housing, their access to livelihood in terms of grazing pastures and so on. And these households which were sitting on this village were literally lifted and put in another place where it was a grazing pasture of another village. They were not given anything beyond that. And overnight they had to find tarpaulins to, find some shelter. They didn't know what to do with their livestock. They didn't know what to do with their sericulture, which was a additional economy for them. And they were all, again, small and marginal farmers. They got completely cut off from their health facilities, the public health centers, schools, colleges, their ration shops, the market, practically everything. And in this new village, they had a very different kind of a problem. When the people died, the host village refused to allow them to be buried, which was such a crazy situation. And this was one of the studies we found as part of a bigger study that we were doing at that time for the University of Minnesota, called the Great Transformations, where we were trying to understand what happens to people when cities transform like this. And this was a village where the airport had already come up, and we were studying these communities to understand where they are, what are they doing, where have they fit in this entire landscape, was one of the objectives of that project. And this is just a small anecdotal story that I am sharing here. So then comes another big issue for which Bangalore has been in the news. Bangalore, as you all know, has been a city of lakes for time immemorial, but we have very few lakes left as of today. Again, lakes here, we refer to them as tanks, because all of these are man-made here in southern India. And most of our lakes got built on. While the city developed soon after independence, and even in the 60s and 70s, our lakes were dried. We built stadiums and bus stands, and you can think about layouts, and you can think about it, and we have all that kind of complexes and buildings out there. But in 2002, the government of Karnataka and Bangalore decided that they would lease out these lakes, and they also created a new entity called the Lake Development Authority. And this Lake Development Authority went around leasing lakes for so-called maintenance. What it meant was the lease was given to very big companies, mostly, the kind of hotel companies and others who were trying to capitalize on the proximity of the lake next to their property. And it was at that time, again, a whole lot of protests took place in the city. People had candlelight vigils. They created a human chain around the lake. There were marches along the lake. They had campaigns where they got eminent personalities to come and sign saying that lakes should not be leased, rented, or sold. But yet the government went ahead and leased out 4 lakes. Three have been converted to almost like an amusement park. You see one on the picture on the right, where they've created a boardwalk, and you enter you have to pay a fee, and everything else is another additional cost. So for a family to be able to go and spend an evening near a lake is become highly impossible today, because it involves a lot of money. And it's not just for recreation. There are also a whole lot of people who depend on these lakes for livelihoods, for fishing and growing a variety of lilies, because during the festive time, these lilies are highly used in all the temples and for all the ceremonies and rituals. That provided a good amount of livelihood for these people. But the minute it was leased, obviously, uh, people who were dependent on the lakes lost their livelihood. It was at that time Environment Support Group filed a public interest litigation. It went on for a very long time. The details of it are available on the ESD website. But what is important is, yes, the petition did result in stopping of such leasing, renting, and selling of lakes. But for those 3 lakes where some investment had already been done, the court said, since some investment has already been done, let it live through the lease period. But we said we cannot allow that to happen, because then that would set a precedent, and it is now being challenged in the Supreme Court. While that is happening, Bangalore's lakes are also seeing a different kind of a challenge, where lakes are foaming up and catching fire too, because we have changed the kind of residential areas that were there. Now we have made it a mixed business district. So every residential area today has all kinds of commercial businesses that are running. So you have car washing industries, small scale manufacturing industries. You have laundries that are running all over the city. Then you have parlors. So and all of this waste is coming into these lakes, and obviously, there's so much chemical out there that it is catching fire. Then we've also had the story of tree felling, road widening, that's been happening again in most of our cities. In Bangalore, it started way back in 2007. And roads were widened to accommodate more cars. The reason it was decided that the roads would be widened was saying that our roads are getting congested. So in order to make sure traffic moves smoothly, we'll widen the roads. And this came at a very crazy cost of not just greenery, it also took away the livelihoods of spaces of street vendors. And then it created roads that became pretty lonely as well. Again, this was something that saw citywide protests, and people actually literally climbed up on the trees to save the trees. And this was in violation of the Town and Country Planning Act, the Karnataka Municipal Administration Act, and a variety of other laws as well. But despite a whole lot of protests, some of the core roads in the city managed to get widened. And you can see the size of the footpath here. This is actually a little better. It's probably at least 3 feet. There are many roads in the city with hardly 1 foot of footpath width. So it completely has taken away the possibility of pedestrians to move around freely. It taken away the vibrancy that many of these roads had. And this madness continues in Bangalore. Despite protests, despite people engaging with the, concerned authorities, and there are many representations from a very wide section of society saying why roads should not be widened. And again, these protests have been joined by very eminent citizens of the city, writers, film actors, and so on. Another very interesting case study is about how the city parks. So Bangalore has these major parks called Cubbon Park and Lal Bagh. And these parks in 2009, they saw something very crazy happening, because the horticulture department decided to come out with the introduction of ID cards for people to use these parks. So this was obviously something that came from the elite section of the society who used this for their morning walks. And they did not want a whole section of the society to be present there, obviously for reasons of how they look, how they dress, how they behave, so on and so forth. So by introducing these ID cards, they made sure that, you know, only a certain kind of people will be seen in these parks. And these parks are also parks which is highly visited by tourists. So Lal Bagh, for instance, sees nearly 50,000 footfall. So they wanted to project a kind of a city which is, you know, clean, green, and the kind of people who come there are a certain class. So as soon as we saw this in the newspapers, we immediately contacted a whole lot of organizations in the city. Organizations that work with the disabled, organizations that work with women, organizations which work on law and policy issues. And we said, this is not done and we need to do something about it. And again, there were protests in the city. And eventually the horticulture department withdrew the ID card. But this was just the beginning of the many crazy things that are happening. And so an indication of how many of the things that are projected in the smart city plans today have come in the past, and because of people's movements, these things have been stalled. Then another crazy issue is about waste. So I think much of it will be dealt later in another session, but I'll just briefly touch upon it. So again, most of our cities don't have a place to dump their waste. All the waste is landing up in the outskirts, in villages. And these villages are suffering from a variety of health-related issues, where because the water is contaminated, soil is contaminated, air is contaminated, and it's impossible for these villagers to go on with their livelihoods. And this is a story of a particular village where livestock rearing was very high and it produced the highest milk for Bangalore. But today, after 20 years, there is no livestock. All the people have, most of them have moved out. Many of them have stayed back only because they have no other choice. And this is a case that ESG took up and it's still fighting. It was only because of public pressure and the village that woke up to this mess. And they said, we are not going to take any of the city's garbage. We are not generating this waste, and we don't want the city's waste dumped here. And why did the city choose to dump this garbage in these villages? Obviously, there's a very high Dalit community out there, small and marginal farmers, many dependent on other people's farms for a livelihood, and livestock rearing. So it was an easy target. The way the farmer got convinced here, it's a long story, but I'm cutting it short just to indicate what is happening in most of our cities today in the context of waste. Then the metro. The metro is something that is again being pushed in almost all of our cities. So the metro started in Bangalore sometime in 2005. And when the alignment was designed, it obviously was not in consultation with the people or hardcore studies of, after studying people's mobility in the city. It was someone somewhere, some consultant sitting in some other country who put together a bunch of designs and sent it across. It was all approved without any public consultation, and the people got to know only when the city was being dug open. And it was at that time, again, the entire city protested. You could see every part of the city waking up to this, saying that we don't want the metro going above ground, push it underground. And we need the trees, we need the heritage buildings. The alignment of the metro is not convenient for all, because the places that it actually travels to are not places where people are going for their work. So you put the metro first and then change the city's FAR ratio so that you again come out with a certain kind of development to make the metro work. So the way the city is being planned, the way the mobility and transport is being planned is completely out of sync with people, where they are going and what they need. And again, the metro came in violation of a whole lot of laws. So this was again challenged in the High Court of Karnataka by ESD, and the High Court gave a very good judgment saying that the first phase is, again, people have invested money, so let's make sure the second phase, we follow all the laws, especially the Town and Country Planning Act, have public consultations, make sure there is complete consent from the people. But yet the second phase is going on without any public consultation. It is going above ground. It is coming at a huge cost. And the number of people it is actually transporting is very less compared to the bus fleet that Bangalore transports. And this is again at a high cost that is being pushed into the city. And it has caused so much damage in terms of environmental health, because everywhere the city is ripped open and there's so much dust. So because of people's protest, some sections of the city have been retained the way it is. So one such part is in South Bangalore, where there's a boulevard of trees, and that survived only because of people's protests and the organizations that fought for it. But there is another picture here that you see with all the children in the lower section. That is a effort that is still ongoing. The metro is taking away a very old church. So this is again in complete violation of all laws, not just of our country, but also of the bank that is investing in it. And the church people have actually challenged the bank based on their own policies, and it is still ongoing, and there's been a lot of conversation around that, and it's the people's efforts that is really influencing the decision making. So like the road widening and the metro was not enough, Bangalore also came out with another proposal a couple of years back in 2017, where they decided to have a steel flyover. And this steel flyover was for a very short distance of just about 7 kilometers, which came at a huge cost. And this was only to connect to the international airport. And this was proposed by BDA, and this was again going to take away a whole lot of trees. Uh, and this came because of the pressure of the corporate world. And again, because of people's protests, it was kind of stalled. It's been put to the back burner. And one more madness evolved just in the beginning of 2020, actually. And this was the elevated corridor project, proposed for about 100 kilometers, which is going to be crisscrossing Bangalore. And this was the solution that was proposed as, to ease the traffic congestion. And obviously, if the elevated corridors come up, it is the motorized car population that's going to be using it. And it's definitely not going to be helping the poor, the pedestrians, the street vendors, and a whole lot of other people who use the city. So again, here the damages were calculated and argued, again, based on the EIA that was prepared by the Karnataka Road Development Corporation Limited. So I'm mentioning BDA, KRDCL, BMRCL. We'll come back to it, but hold those names. Then the street vendor rights. Street vendors have been a part of cities for a very long time. And these are efforts that have been ongoing in almost all our cities for a very long time again, because street vendors get evicted from one road, they get shunted from one side to the other side, one road to the other road. All of a sudden, they are not allowed to vend in certain places. So, and there has been again a whole lot of movements from the Street Vendors Federation here in Bangalore, demanding that the street vending committees be set up and the provisions of the Street Vending Act be implemented. And this was also because there was 100% FDI that was allowed in all the retail sections. So as a result, malls would be kept open and supermarkets would be kept open all the 24 hours, while street vendors would be out of business. So there have been these kind of protests as well in the city. And because of their very strong presence and movement, today they have been able to secure some patches here and there. And the authorities are listening to them, but not completely. So again, in South Bangalore, there was another amazing project to create a proper vending place for the street vendors, along with designing proper footpaths for citizens. Then also making sure there is parking facility and proper road facility. But for various reasons, that project did not go through, and the street vendors continue to suffer after being evicted every now and then. And a city like Bangalore is also home for many homeless people. There was a recent study which quotes about 4,000 odd people, but that's a very, very gross underestimate, because you see a lot of homeless people here in Bangalore under flyovers, under the metro. Then also you see that picture where the water pipes have become homes. And Bangalore has also seen very violent eviction of poor people. There is this, the one place is the Ijipura slum, where people were evicted overnight to make way for a fancy commercial and residential complex. And this is very close to a very elite neighborhood called Kormangla. And these are stories that are happening in all our cities, not just Bangalore. And we also have, if I can say, the Antilla of Bangalore. So that is Vital Malia's penthouse, sitting close to UB City. So these kind of penthouses are also going up in many parts of Bangalore. And these penthouses are coming up in places which were originally slum neighborhoods neighborhoods that did not have proper documentation, and they are the ones who get sacrificed. So who is responsible for all this? Be it fires, be it maintaining the roads, ensuring livelihoods are vibrant and active, making sure there's places for recreation, such as parks, and making sure there are our water bodies are saved and protected, making sure the bridges and whole lot of other infrastructure in the city is safe and running, and there is some kind of harmony in the city. So it is obviously the urban local government's responsibility. It is these urban local bodies that are the immediate interfaces for people to interact with their city leaders. And in fact, they are the first line of response and defense. So if the road in front of my house is not functional, I need to go to these leaders first, the so-called ward committee, and bring it to their notice, and they should be in a position to address the challenges. This morning, there's been a WhatsApp message that's been circulated here in Bangalore saying that there will be very heavy rains, and all of us have been warned to stay indoors and take care of our family members, because Bangalore today has become a place where people are getting washed away in the rain. When we were children, monsoon was a very fun time. But now parents are very scared to send their children out in the evenings, because there's been a whole lot of incidents where children, youth have been sucked into manholes, into open drains during the monsoon, because you just can't differentiate between the road and the drain, which are next to each other. And many a time these drains don't even have barricades. So in these kind of circumstances, it is the local government that has to take responsibility. And if we look at the provisions of the 74th Amendment, which was passed, the constitutional amendment which came in 1992, and if you see the 12th schedule of this Nagarapalika Act, which was passed in 92, and see what are the things that are there, it is all of this that I just shared, all of the case studies, the urban planning, including town planning. So if we say urban planning today here in a city like Bangalore, we have master plans that have been coming every 10 years. And these master plans are not made by people in the city. They are outsourced to consultants who are from France, Singapore, US, and other parts of Europe, and also Australia, who have no idea, who have no connect to the city. And every city is very unique. It has its own language, its food, its culture, its traditions, its heritage. But yet, without any regard to all of that, urban planning today has been outsourced. And these plans are made available to the people at some central point in the city, in a big hall, where you're supposed to go look at these maps and understand what these maps are saying, understand from the maps whether your house will get bulldozed or whether your land will be taken away for some corridor project. And those maps are not readable by everybody. How many of us can even read maps? And the maps most often have not had anything beyond nice, beautiful colors around them showing the roads and the neighborhoods. They haven't indicated anything. So people here have been protesting that this is not the way to come out with master plans, but still the authorities turn a blind eye to it. Then regulation of land use and construction of buildings. So here we have in Bangalore all kinds of buildings that are coming up. The gated communities are increasing day by day. And many of the open spaces, the civic amenity spaces, are being traded for commercial complexes. Most of our neighborhoods today have very few civic amenity sites, which are actually used for services that are useful for the people. Then planning for economic and social development. So again, it is the function at the ward level. Roads and bridges, water supply for domestic, industrial, and commercial purposes. public health, sanitation, conservancy, and solid waste management. So public health, that is again something so crucial, is something that you handle at the ward committee level, at the ward level. The pandemic has, shown us this like never before. And this is the time to kind of wake up to it. If only our public health systems were functioning at the ward level, things would have been so easy to manage this entire pandemic, instead of having the crazy, unplanned lockdowns, which created so much of chaos and fear amongst everybody across the country. Then sanitation and solid waste management. Solid waste management again is something that has to be managed at the ward level. So in the case that ESG took up to the High Court, what did the High Court say? The High Court sent us back into the law books saying that go manage your waste at the household level, at the source, segregate the waste at the source, make sure the wet waste is composted, the dry waste goes back to its respective recyclable industries, and make sure every ward has the dry waste collection centers, make sure every ward has composting areas where the wet waste can be composted, and it made sure that the waste would not leave the city. See, these things are very important because what is happening now with this whole smart city thing being pushed, with PPPs being pushed, with the SPVs coming into the picture, they are capitalizing on this and not allowing the waste to go this way. They want to burn the waste. So a whole lot of companies are out there ready to incinerate the waste. And this was something that was fought at the High Court level, saying incineration is not the answer to managing the waste, because incineration creates a whole lot of toxic substances, and it's going to create a public health problem. And there was a push from the PPP saying that, oh, today we have fancy incinerators that will take care of everything. But at the end of the day, you're going to have bottom ash after burning all your plastic and various other materials. And that bottom ash has to be dumped somewhere. And where in the city will that be dumped? So these are the kind of pushes that are coming. Then fire services. I just mentioned to you about a fire hazard that took place 10 years back. Many have taken place. Many small scale fire hazards have taken place. But again, our fire stations are not under the control of the ULB completely. And there continues to be the risk of fire because of violation in building bylaws as well. Then urban forestry protection and taking care of the environment and the ecological aspects. This is again something that we are seeing across all our cities today, where most of the green patches are gone, most of the trees are gone. If you understand how the cities were originally planned, for example, Bangalore, we had one of the finest foresters who literally designed the greenery around Bangalore. So many of you who know Bangalore will know that, the tree-lined avenues of Bangalore are planned in such a way that practically every month you will have one street that is completely in bloom. So starting from December, we have the tabubias. There's a purple color tabubia and then a yellow color tabubia that bloom during December, January, which is soon followed by a whole lot of other trees. And especially if you're going down the Vidhan Sauda and the High Court Road, you will see how beautifully these trees were laid out there. But that again should have been replicated at the ward level. And then safeguarding interests of weaker sections of society, including the disabled. See, this is again something at the ward level. Today, many of the buildings are completely inaccessible to most of the senior citizens and the disabled. Most of the banks, the post offices, the ration shops are not located in places where the disabled can access easily. Then there are also pockets of poor neighborhoods which don't get water, which don't get electricity. which don't have proper sanitation. And there's also livelihood issues. So these are things that can be dealt with at the ward level. Then the slum improvement upgrades, the urban poverty alleviation, promoting urban amenities and facilities such as parks, gardens, and playgrounds. While most of our cities have historic parks that have probably been created at when the city was founded, I don't think any new such huge parks have been added. The parks that we have in the city today, all the new parks that have come up, are smaller parks, and they cater to a certain kind of users only. So we have a typical jogging track and all ornamental plants, which are water guzzlers and pesticide guzzlers. And you're not supposed to run around and sit anywhere and everywhere. There are very well designated benches only on that you can sit. And even the parks are not accessible to many of the senior citizens, children, pregnant women. Playgrounds are completely gone. There are no playgrounds in Bangalore. You'll hardly see children playing on our roads today, or roads or playgrounds today. Some empty site is where children have to occupy to play cricket, and we fail to understand, some of our finest cricketers have come from these kind of playgrounds where they've practiced cricket and hockey and many other things. So with these kind of provisions, we yet fail to ensure that these are addressed. Then taking care of cultural and educational and aesthetic aspects. Then I mentioned about the burial ground case. So see, burial grounds, cremation grounds, again, are at the ward level. Cattle ponds and prevention of cruelty to animals. This is again at the ward level. And unfortunately today, most of our cities, and especially Bangalore, we see a lot of cattle that's all the time near the dustbins, the garbage bins, trying to scavenge some food out there. And there have been newspaper reports where tons and tons of plastic has been found in the stomachs of cattle. Then the births and deaths, the registrations. This is very interesting because I've been dealing with a personal case where trying to get my children's birth certificates, and it's been a Herculean task because the birth certificates I have are no longer recognized for many reasons, and I had to redo it. It's not happening at the ward level. It has been very challenging. So these are very simple things that can be addressed at the ward level. Public amenities, including street lighting, parking lots, bus stops, public conveniences, then the slaughterhouses and tanneries. Again, Bangalore has another story of the tannery, which has been housed in a particular place and which is constantly under threat of eviction. It probably even part of it is already evicted. And there are a whole lot of challenges around that. So let's see, with those 18 points, how is our city supposed to be planned and governed? So typically, you have the ward committees, and under the ward committees, you have the area sabhas. So it is the area sabhas that come out with a plan. They say, okay, we want a park here, we want burial ground here, we want a public health center here. And those plans, including things like, we need avenue trees, we need stormwater drains, so on and so forth, we need a school, are submitted to the ward committees. The ward committees bunch all of this together and then submit it to the municipal corporation. And these municipal corporations, based on the size of the city, they pass it through the district planning committees or the metropolitan planning committees. And then these plans are blessed by the State Finance Commission and then submitted to the state government. And then the budget has to come and the plans have to be implemented. But how are our cities being planned today? So you have, on one hand, this promise, the constitutional promise of the 73rd Amendment, both the Panchayat Raj Act and the Constitutional Nagarpalika Act, where it is very crucial. It was implemented to ensure that there is equity and justice for all, with better planning, with the planning coming ground up, and so that our villages and cities are well managed. But we are far from this, very, very far from this. No city in any state has proper, fully functional ward committees. We all know that today. And every time we have gone to the court for many, many instances, the court has directed that the ward committees be formed. And this was particularly in Bangalore, where the waste issue, when it was challenged in the High Court looked into it in great detail and also realized that if waste is to be managed at the ward level, there has to be ward committees. So it forced the BBMP to go form the ward committees in Bangalore. And then after the ward committees were formed, it realized that the ward committee rules were not there. It again forced the ward committees to come up with rules. So the court has been playing a significant role in ensuring the provision of these laws are implemented. And another major challenge in many of the cities is, for example, the mayor is the elected head in Bangalore. But much of the powers, in fact, all of the powers are rested with the commissioner, who is appointed by the state government. And these municipal corporations are further denied their political, powers because of the political role that continues to operate because of the various parastatal agencies that have been created by the state. So BDA was something that was one of the first such parastatal agencies that came up, just as the Delhi Development Authority was the first one that was formed by Indira Gandhi during her time. And the parastatal agency itself has had its history going back to the US, especially in the context of military and defense sectors, where they created such parastatals. So in this complexity, so you also see that long list of parastatals that we have here in a city like Bangalore. Along with the BBMP, you have all of this. So while this confusion exists, now we are pushing this smart city mission on it, which is completely out of the purview of the local government. Because these smart cities are created by the special purpose vehicles, and these special purpose vehicles are not answerable to the urban local body at all. They run like corporate houses with a CEO and a bunch of managers and general managers and financial controllers and so on. So if you see this, the provisions of the 74th Amendment have literally been dumped in the dustbin. And look at the Smart City Mission guidelines. So it's very interesting to read some sections of it. The language is very interesting. Like Gaurav shared yesterday, there is no universal definition. So each SPV can decide what its definition of smart city is. And the kind of solutions that they are proposing is largely based on technology and data. And also those projects where you think it is not technology and data, it is about steel, cement, and granite. So we are pouring more cement everywhere if it is not technology. And Gaurav explained how some of the projects are based on area-based development and what is applicable to the entire city. So there are major challenges, and it is read as an integrated approach between the central government, state government, and the local urban local body. But the urban local body is subservient to all of these. it has no power by itself, and they are forced to abide and provide everything that these SPVs demand. And we could go into the details of how each of these companies are formed and what are the shareholdings, and even there are some rules and regulations within the shareholding capacities. Then the SPVs also have the power to raise large loans. So that is one of the main reasons why SPVs are being created. They can raise loans, they can venture into all kinds of partnerships with other private companies, sell assets, and so on. So a whole lot of consultants are being brought, a whole lot of PPPs are coming in. Again, PPPs, if we are talking about public-private partnerships, its origin goes back into 1800s. It has been there since the time of the British, and soon after that, I think it was the Tatas who were one of the first companies to set up this whole PPP model, and it has only increased since then. So in this entire landscape of SPVs and the urban local bodies and the parastatals, you see how each of them work in their own silos, and the SPVs also have a advisory forum, which is again filled with bureaucrats, and it has a very tokenistic presence from the citizens, and even the citizens are from resident welfare associations or one or two people from the slum federations. And obviously the kind of meetings that are conducted are not the kind that are mandated by law. Many of these things are done very secretively. There is no transparency, and the people of the city hardly get to know what kind of plans are coming up. But this is a model that is being promoted as a great consultative process. But the kind of people who are able to influence these decisions are obviously the rich and the elite, who have access to all kinds of fancy gadgets and access to go to certain places where such meetings take place, and they're not announced in any public dailies. So people will hardly ever know. And like I said, it has a CEO, and Gaurav also shared many of these things yesterday. So what is happening is this kind of a model, it keeps the municipal corporations, the elected representatives who are supposed to be closest to the people, nearest to the people, are kept at a distance from all these big plans that are being pushed into the city. And the SPVs also have the power to push projects, to hasten up projects, so that the money is in and things move at a faster pace. But who is it benefiting? Who was part of that plan? What is being planned are questions nobody really knows. Then, like I said, it completely bypasses all the provisions of the existing provisions in law. And there is no this thing as well, a grievance redressal forum as well. It's very tokenistic, and I can give you one example. So during the pandemic, waste has not been picked up everywhere. So today, Bangalore being one of the cities with very high online complaint possibilities, my neighborhood issued a complaint saying that waste has not been picked up, and the complaint was very well received. Whoever complained from the Resident Welfare Association got a message back, a reply back, and everyone was very happy. And they gave a token number or docket number or something like that. Even after a week, nothing ever happened. And then the next message the president of the RWA receives is, the problem has been addressed, and it has been taken out of the list. It's over. While the waste was sitting there even after 2 weeks, and they had to physically go and get people and get it removed. So that is the kind of technology based solutions that are being pushed. So in this context, it is really time to reflect for all of us as researchers, activists, general public, students. We really need to understand how our cities are getting appropriated and commodified by these parastatal agencies, with the state government, the corporations, and the international and Indian financial institutions, and the kind of phony ventures that they are proposing. And it is time now to kind of really imagine and construct many of the ideas that are coming out from people's movements, from the city level protests that have happened, the city level representations people are giving. It's important to hear that, document that, and take those forward, because it is the people who are planning. And these protests are not the kind of protests we had seen in the past. Something else that I failed to mention is cities like Bangalore were also largely shaped by trade union movements, because Bangalore housing public sector units in the 60s and 70s saw a whole lot of rallies and protests from them, demanding many things. And many of the townships that were created by the public sector units here in Bangalore are very interesting, because it was the first time neighborhoods were actually being designed and implemented in a proper way. So many of the neighborhoods that have been created by these townships have all the facilities that would probably come in that 12th schedule. But after that, whatever happened, the city saw crazy growth, and that as a result, today we are seeing these kind of protests. And it is the kind of questions people are asking which are very important. And it is important to ask these unsettling questions of why, what, when, where, how, and who is deciding. And it is also very crucial to learn from the works of Henry Lefebvre, David Harvey, Elinor Ostrom, and from the people of Rojava, the Zapatista movement, and various other resistances of indigenous communities, because they are showing us the path to move forward in terms of how we can plan and design our city. And also it's important to inquire and deliberate on this whole concept of right to the city. Who has the right to the city, and who uses the commons, and how we can work on a production of a knowledge system and create those space for people to imagine transformations that are possible, imagine transformations that are socially just, economically equitable, ecologically sensible, and genuinely human. Because the kind of problems we are seeing today in terms of waste, water, green spaces, it is very important we start looking at it from these aspects. And it's also very important to look at some of the small victories that each of our cities have seen through these kind of movements, where people's ideas have helped shape small sections of their city. And they've also come out with alternate planning methods. See, these alternate planning methods are again that have come about in practically every protest and movement in Bangalore. I was talking about the road widening protest. So during the road widening protest, there were urban planners who actually engaged with the municipality, saying that here are alternate plans if you want to widen the city. Here are alternate plans to ensure pedestrians have safety, pedestrians have enough space. Here are alternate plans to make these cycling lanes here in Bangalore. Here are the alternate plans to save some patches of the greenery we want to save. So, but the authorities just fail to engage. So there are alternate ways to deal with these kind of challenges, and alternate methods of planning and administration. So yes, there are successes and failures, but it's important that we all continue collectively and the efforts to ask, engage, and inquire about how we shape the city must go on. And with the focus on basic infrastructure, and yes, we can have technology. It's not that we're going to do away with technology, but technology that will not just benefit a small percentage of the elite and leave a large section of the population out. Technology that will benefit everybody. So a simple example I can give here is all our courts. It is only today that we have those display boards where it will tell you which case is going on, what's the number of the case, and the name of the judge, and so on. And today we do get messages on our phone saying that your case is listed. Otherwise, we've spent days and days in the past just going and waiting, and your case never comes up. Simple things like, the judges are reading out the judgment, and we don't have technology that will capture their dictation and immediately turn it into text, and which is accessible to all. We have to wait for a day or two for to see the actual judgment. So these are simple technology additions that will help a larger section of the population, which is largely missing. And again, we are sitting in the IT hotbed of India. Then, like I said, movements in cities are demanding for a basic quality of life. They're not demanding something that's beyond the capacity of our governments. It's very basic stuff for a good quality of life. We've made our cities so unlivable today. So it's important to listen to what people are saying and influence our decision makers to listen to these voices. And citizens should be at the center of all this planning. And it's about deepening democracy. So I thought I will just close with this quote from David Harvey. So, which says, people must get active, go outside, get moving. This is a crucial time. In India, yes, it is a super crucial time. Massive wealth and capital haven't budged one bit so far. We have to give it a huge push if we want to see something different in our society. We need to create mechanisms and forms of organization which reflect the needs and wants of society as a whole, not just a privileged oligarchic class of individuals. And there's some suggested readings. I know Maju has already put a whole lot of readings. I didn't want to add more, and many of you probably have written a lot more. It'll be great if you can share that with us. I thought the first reading goes with what I was sharing today, so I put that in. And the second one, again, talks a lot about David Harvey and Henry Lafayette, so I put that in. And the third one is a report, actually. The reason why I put that here was this was a workshop that we conducted way back in 2008. But what the report captures is it captures the voices of all sections of our society who shared their opinion about the road widening. It was a workshop that was so much like a public consultation. And this workshop report obviously was shared and it was never taken up, but these are the kind of things we need to do. These are the kind of representations and voices. I know many of you have been trying, and it's very discouraging with the way things are moving in our country, but I think it's important we move in that direction. So thank you, and we could take questions.
Thank you, Bhargavi. Thank you so much. A lot of point in terms of elaborating the whole process, explaining a lot of things historically and also structurally how the governance mechanisms work. But more importantly, you also brought out how citizens are reacting to many of these developments, how local people are responding to some of these changes. There's resistance to, these larger transformations occupying and exploiting the urban commons, the lakes or the greenery around in the cities, the increasing commercialization of such spaces where entry fees, which was not there earlier. Now we have more commercialized kind of systems where if you want to enter into such spaces for recreation, you have to pay a price for that. So, I mean, and importantly, very critically solid waste management going out from the city into the rural areas, creating a havoc in the lives of those rural people. Um, quite, I think, very explanatory and very insightful presentation. I have a lot of questions myself, and there are questions on the chat box and some of the comments as well. I'll read out a few of them. So this is from Joseph Anthony, and he's asking, how is an area or ward defined, and is that a process of is there a process of committees being elected into them? And there are follow-up questions. Are there any studies of failures at these levels? What is the fundraising capacity at the area and ward level? Does it exist? Are there any legal impediments to fund projects by raising funds locally, i.e. at the area or ward level? Do you want to share
Yeah.
your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So the area, the ward is usually defined based on some parameters. So for example, in Bangalore today, we have 198 wards. Many of the wards are very big and some wards are very small. It's supposed to be based on population and a couple of other parameters. So now the demand from many of the people here, and especially the NGOs, is to relook at this, how the wards are defined, and probably increase the number of wards as well. And that process has been ongoing. In terms of, are there any studies of failures at these levels? So the wards have been there, but the ward committees have not been set up at all across the country. Now and then there have been some efforts, but it was only in response to our case, EESD's case in the waste management issue, which went to court in 2013, that the court said, go ensure the ward committees are set up. So the way the ward committees are set up are, they are nominated by the people of the ward, and these people meet very frequently, regularly, look into the challenges of every ward, and they are the ones who produce a plan, give it to the corporate. They work with the area sabas and get the plans from. So the wards are again divided into areas where you have these area sabas. They work with the area sabas, get the plans, submit it to the municipal corporation. It goes up the ladder, like I showed you in that one slide, and then the budget is allocated and for implementation. But unfortunately, it has never worked that way. Plans have never been ground up. Plans have always been top down. It is the Bangalore Development Authority which is planning, or the BMRDA which is planning, or some other authority, SPVs, that are planning today. So we've also set up SPVs for many other things, not just the smart city. So they are the ones who are coming out with the plans, and the ward committees have not had any role in that. So it is during the pandemic that again some effort went forward in Bangalore to make sure the ward committees meet. They do an assessment of their ward in the context of the pandemic, find out what kind of challenges people are facing, and also raise awareness among people in the ward. These are some of the positive efforts that have been ongoing in the context of ward committee. Yes, there are also challenges of a particular political party bringing in their people. But it is always good to have that attention as well, because then they can be held accountable for many failures as well. So what is the fundraising? Like I said, it is usually after the plan is submitted, the money is allocated. But like I said, it does not have. But yes, in future, there has to be some kind of way where, if we are talking about change, we should be able to imagine ways in which, the at the ward level, if people can raise fund. Right now that possibility is not there, but we should be able to imagine those things as well. Yeah.
I think, yeah, very important point, and I would just like to add a couple to them. Uh, Also, how selective things are. So even in these reform measures, there are few things uh, which are a bit positive, like formation of ward committees or mohalla sabhas, or one thing which I remember is the bylaws. But how selective all these processes are, that it largely formation of rules and the acts for formation of ward committees has been bypassed at the state government level and at the municipal corporation level. There's no effort into really going into that. Or similarly, for putting in place systems for monitoring, for implementing rainwater harvesting in individual houses, I don't see that happening in our city. But when it comes to privatization, when it comes to increasing user charges, when it comes to PPPs, so enthusiastically the authorities and the officials and the political representatives come forward to push some of these things. So very selective kind of also the overall characteristics that we have. In terms of planning, I think also, I mean, just one more point I want to add. Many of the cities have seen at the local level where there is intense exercise of participatory planning, where the ward committees come together, the local representatives, the authorities come together and make plans in different countries. I mean, examples in Brazil and other places where people come together and form plans for their wards and areas, that what exactly do they want. They want drains, they want water supply pipelines, what they want, and then the plans are put in place, a budgeting is being made, and those are submitted to the larger municipal agency, and then it gets finalized at some place. But of course, I think in India we don't follow some of these processes. Uh, Moving on to the next one, Mridula Garg has written a comment. She's saying that these examples from Bangalore are so apt for what Amita Bhaviskar refers to as bourgeois environmentalism. Uh, Aman Roy has a question. He says that since a lot of individuals, including the CEOs, are on the board of these SPVs, are either state level bureaucrats or municipal commissioners, are they promoting private interest in their capacities as public officials? That's a question.
Yeah, definitely. So we are seeing that in many of the processes that are being pushed. So I shared an example of how the waste management companies are mushrooming across the country. Again, there is one or two companies who are present in almost every city. They have created such disasters by not following some of the basic scientific principles in running these units. They've created so much contamination, and it is the same companies, because of their connection with these kind of bureaucrats, they tend to make their way and um, not just make their way, but they're also pushing certain things, like I said, about incineration. Incineration is being pushed in such a crazy way across the country. And Bangalore has been one city that has managed to kind of delay the incinerators coming in such a big way. Pune, I know, has a lot of incinerators. I think even Kerala today has a lot of incinerators. So these kind of pushes are definitely there. And even if, when we are looking at lakes, uh, there are certain companies whose name will pop up for cleaning, maintaining, gardening, and all that. So obviously, that is happening.
Yeah, so Joseph Anthony has a comment. He's saying that maybe the digitization caused by the pandemic can be used to infuse transparency in a few areas and wards in holding their meetings. The consequent success, both in process and also hopefully in delivering desired results, could set an example. The demonstration effect scalable can be scalable. Starting at the bottom, this way could be the way decentralization can be made more effective if local level projects raise funds locally. Instead of SPVs, can we think of people's sovereign units introduced in one of the ESG CFA discussions? Do you have any reflections or?
Yeah. So the first part, like I said, so they've formed a whole lot of groups at the ward level. They have activated many of the booth level committees today here in Bangalore, and many of us are part of that. And they are using WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and all kinds of media to keep everybody updated about what's happening. Right now, it is largely about technology. It is about creating websites, creating data, and so on. It's important for those of us in this sector to engage more meaningfully there and help these processes go in a proper manner. Otherwise, this entire digital landscape can get hijacked again by private um, interests. Um, yeah, I think Joseph brought about this PSU yesterday as well. Um, I don't think I have much knowledge of the PSUs.
Okay. Maju is asking about how do the municipal councils and corporations respond to things like SPVs in smart cities? Who gets revenue stream and governance rights overriding democratically elected local self-government?
So there has been a lot of conflict, in fact, between the urban local bodies and the SPVs, because in many of the cases, the ULBs have been made subservient to the SPVs. And so there has been a lot of delay in responding to the asks of the SPV, or in collaborating in whatever small way they're supposed to deliver. There is in some cases, I think it has also turned a little ugly from what I have read. There definitely is a lot of friction that has created, and this friction is creating delay. So at the end of it, money may have come into the SPV, but it is not reaching the ULB for that small little project. The project is not getting done, and ultimately it is the people who are suffering, whereas the SPVs have plum salaries and they are happy.
Yeah,
So
true. I think that is also one of the reasons for this whole revolving door thing.
yeah.
Many of the IAS officers and senior bureaucrats, they want one hand in terms of privileges and power that's there, which comes with the bureaucracy and also with the private corporations as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Angna is asking, as smart city boundary sometimes engulfs some areas which are considered peri-urban, these village-like settlements governed by Gram Panchayat, but comes under the jurisdiction of smart city boundary. What do you think about these places? How the challenges in case of governance are taken care in these places?
Yeah, see, so for the SPV, it is about delivering that particular project. That's it. They are not governed under any law. It is like a factory model. You put dough here and you get cookie on the other side. How fast you get the cookie is what they look at. So many of the panchayats too are seeing this. It's like a stepchild kind of treatment that the panchayats are facing today, while SPVs are going about their work, where again the panchayats are probably made subservient in terms of sharing their whatever resources, maps, and small little tasks they are supposed to do at the village level. So the dignity of these entities are being lost. They're being deprived of their dignity wherever SPVs are going.
Yeah, true. Next, we have a question from Shiva Dubey. She is asking, is there any movement against smart cities mission in India? Do you think it's needed? Do you think it would help? It would be helpful to evaluate the ecological footprint of smart city projects?
Yes, there is a lot of movement against smart cities. So many cities have actually protested. There is a lot of protest that has happened in Mumbai and Pune and a couple of other places where people have woken up to it and asked all the hard questions and held them accountable. And they are beginning to shake the system. And this is something that is needed across India. Everybody needs to finally understand governance from the point of view of the provisions of the 74th Amendment. Many of us don't even know that. So unless we understand that, we will not be able to ask the questions. So in many of the middle class neighborhoods, they're very happy with SPVs because they think many of their services will get done in a jiffy. And it's much more easy because once you go to the ward level office, things get very delayed. That's a mindset people have. So we need to change that mindset, make people understand their right to the city, what is the constitutional right that they have as a citizen, the role of the ward committee, their role at the ward level. These are things that we need to kind of start talking about so that more people will wake up to this, because at the end of the day, it will be their money that they are losing. So we need to kind of do this awareness raising on a war footing, because continuously we are being cheated. So yesterday, Gaurav was talking about JNUM, and earlier to that, there have been many other such programs and schemes and things that have come. Smart city is one more such thing, and tomorrow we'll have some other mission that's going to come over. It is the people who will end up paying the money and losing the money, while you're not going to get any peace, a moment of a moment to cherish in the city, because you're continuously dealing with the challenges itself, and none of these services are actually benefiting everybody. So we need to wake up everybody and ask all these questions across all our cities. And there are already a lot of evaluations of the smart city projects, both based on ecological, environmental, financial, and also in terms of deliveries. There are a bunch of studies already, and no harm in doing more study, because evidence is always good in fighting these projects out. So I would definitely encourage more research, more projects to study.
Dr. Yogesh Pisolkar is asking, what are the provisions for heritage conservation in smart city planning?
Uh, so it depends on what kind of project the SPV is doing. So, for instance, in Bangalore, there is a provision for heritage conservation under the smart city project. If you read the details of it, you will get to know how they are redoing the core city. So Bangalore, as you all know, has a whole lot of history going back to the 15th century, early 12th century as well. So we have a whole lot of things that are not in a great state, but still some heritage that Bangalore holds on to. So in conservation of that and rejuvenation of this, Bangalore has received some money for this part of heritage conservation. We need to look into the details of it, depending on what each of these projects are planning to do. So in most places, it is about laying pavements, making sure they are nice paths when tourists come to see. Again, these projects are not to conserve the heritage structures themselves. It is to make sure there is a greater tourist footfall. So if we really did bother about heritage, we would not be bulldozing a old church where we want to lay a metro, or we won't be bulldozing part of Lal Bagh in a city like Bangalore to put a metro station there. So even the heritage conservation projects are focused towards those areas and places that are attracting the tourists today and not for the heritage value. Bangalore has these Kempegowda towers. We had 12 such towers and only 4 are surviving. Out of the 4, one is in such a horrible state. There is garbage lying all over that place. And we name our international airport after Kempegowda, saying Kempegowda International Airport. We have Kempegowda bus stand, so on and so forth. But this Kempegowda tower today is in such a sad state. I do have a picture, but I'm not able to share it right now. But it is in such a sad state. So we really don't care about heritage. Because there is some money that's going to come in the name of heritage conservation, where you putting it in a place which will generate more money by more tourist footfall. We really don't care about heritage in our cities.
Yeah, I think broadly that's the way it is. I mean, it's at the discretion of the smart city company to take up heritage projects or not. For example, I'll just bring a couple of instances in Indore. So they're doing development, but local people, local reports say that rather than development, it's more of commercializing the local heritage and the ancient buildings, which are part of the common kind of spaces. And then a lot of livelihoods which actually existed around those spaces in terms of informal trade, street vendors is actually being destroyed. And projects are running at such slow paces that people are really frustrated with whatever is happening, and both in terms of the slow pace of development and how poorly the things are changing and not really benefiting the local, the traders who have shops there, or the informal uh, street vendors who actually put up their shops. Indore has a very traditional kind of a food market. So there is a Sarafa Bazaar, the jewelry market, and once this Sarafa Bazaar shuts down in the evening around 7 or 8, the informal street vendors come around and they set up their shops around the Sarafa Bazaar. So you find all sort of delicacies there. But because of this smart city heritage development, they've all dug up the roads around, they've all destroyed the existing pavements where the street vendors were there. So everybody is frustrated, and the project is not nowhere close to completion. Similarly, in Bhopal, they've picked up a few places which were of old heritage buildings, and they have commercialized it. So then building, of course renovating them, but then also coming up with restaurants in these spaces. So now places which were free for access, you have to pay a fees to get into that, and you have to eat something, otherwise it's not accessible. So I mean, those kind of heritage development plans that are coming. We have a question from Nitin. He's saying how citizens are viewing, Nitin from UA, how citizens are viewing the smart city. Like, we know it means different to different people. Any insights on how urban poor are looking at smart city, or what are their understanding on smart cities?
Uh, yeah, see, this name is something very catchy, smart city. So most of the middle class are very happy thinking they can now do things sitting from the comfort of their homes. And not many people even understand much of it. So I think it's important that groups like us and those of us who are engaged in these conversations discuss a lot more about it, try and understand what's happening in each of our cities, make people part of those discussions and studies, and let them see things for themselves. That is the role that we need to play. And once you start the conversation and open up these debates, people will definitely wake up to what is happening. So even the so-called comfortable middle class will also wake up to it once they know that their money is not going in the right way. um, Insights of how urban poor are looking at it, I don't think uh, the poor really have time to understand what's happening in the city, because today we've created a situation where their next meal is unsure. They work all day to ensure that one meal, and how will I get to my workplace is a big challenge. How much time will I spend collecting water for my household is a challenge, or how much debt do I have towards my family's healthcare are bigger challenges that um, the poor are lost in. I don't think they have the comfort of being able to even think of what's happening in terms of all these various projects that have come, the JNERM and now the smart city. So it's time that much of this is also we ensure that it reaches them, so that they also wake up to what is happening. And unfortunately, the times again are not conducive for people to meet, gather, conduct workshops. So those of us who have access to these kind of technology are today, privileged to be engaging in these conversations, whereas they don't have this luxury. So we have to find alternate ways of reaching out to them, making sure they are also part of these conversations, and they also raise these questions through their federations and associations, and hold the authorities accountable.
Thank you. Mridula Garg is asking, can we as residents put pressure on the municipal corporations to form ward committees without moving the court?
Yes, we can. In Bangalore, through a different case, we got a direction from the court. But I think once people wake up to it and engage with the municipal corporation saying that we want ward committees, I think that's the right way to go in all our cities.
Yeah. Uh, I have a few questions regarding the whole judicial processes that you engaged with. What was the response of the courts? Do you think they really understand the overlap where the policies and projects and governance come with when they come in contact with the legal processes? And are the local authorities really serious about implementing court orders? Does that really get implemented on the ground? Because the judges never come and see what's happening; they just pass the orders.
Uh, Interestingly, in Bangalore, Touchwood, we've had some really good judges who've not just given great orders, but who've also come and seen what is happening. So, in the waste case, the waste management case, both the judges came to this village where the illegal, unscientific landfill had been put up by this private company, and saw the truth for themselves. And thereafter, they have been following to ensure how much of it is being implemented. The case is not over yet, it is still being heard. So there has been a lot of follow up from the court. And yes, the authorities are shameless. They can just stand there without a proper answer in the court. But it is important that the court is pushing them. Um, so we are seeing a lot of that, not just in the waste issue, but we are also seeing that in the lake issue and many related issues. I think it's the people's pressure, the presence of a community where which is kind of watching and monitoring and discussing this constantly is and people writing in newspapers and the dailies is kind of also influencing judgments, I think, to a large extent, because it's there in the newspapers. Every morning you open the newspapers, these are some of the grievances that people are reading today and experiencing today. So it has been a very engaged court, and because of that, there's some implementation. It's moving towards that, although at a snail's pace.
Just to follow it up, thank you. How do you think the local representatives, the ward councillors, and other political leaders respond or react to these situations? I mean, at one hand, the projects are being implemented. The other hand, the court is issuing a judgment against it. How do they deal with this situation? Have you come across any such
Yeah, yeah.
instance? Yeah.
We've conducted a whole lot of workshops with ward committee members in the past, and even now, ESG continues to engage with the ward committees. There are a lot of evaluation studies that are ongoing. The ward committee members are pretty engaged. Many a time they don't know what is happening, and when they hear it from us, they show a lot of interest to understand. In some cases, the ward committee members are representing, they are there just as a rubber stamp. It's mostly the husbands who are controlling them. They don't know what's happening. So, for example, I know this because in my ward where I live, it is many of them are women, and I make sure I call them up and talk to them, whether it is waste or rainwater or whatever, and then they will be very happy to hand it over to their husband, saying that please talk to him. But I'm like, you are the ward committee member, you need to have a conversation with me. Then she has openly admitted that she doesn't know much and her husband will update me on it. And this has happened even during the pandemic. I was saying there are a whole lot of groups that have been set up and a lot of things are moving well. So in that context, yes.
Uh, Marjorie Fernandez has a question. She's saying instead of local government performing its basic functions, which would benefit more people, smart cities are being set up to benefit a tiny percentage of people. The smart cities are being set up without the consent of the affected people. It seems that protests by civil society groups is the only way to counter the smart city movement, since legal remedies are not available when constitutional rights are being violated. How to get more civil society groups involved in the struggle?
Yeah, I think it is important to create these spaces and have these conversations. See, in Bangalore, the issue of waste woke up the entire city to it. And it was not just the issue of waste, it was also a little Dalit village saying that, hey, enough, stop bringing your city's garbage out here. You take care of your waste. Don't dump it on our backyard. That woke up Bangalore to the fact that they did not have a system in place. And that pushed people to go to court. And then the court gave a direction saying, go form your ward committees. So these are stories we need to tell and share and help people understand. And it's also important that we build these conversations around the challenges every city is facing, every neighborhood is facing. So in your own neighborhood, it could just be the absence of stormwater drains where there is a lot of water flooding, or there could just be the absence of a playground where children don't have a place to play. So go engage with the ward committee. If it is not there, challenging the municipal corporation to form the ward committee, go to the local ward offices, find out what is happening there, find out what kind of budgets are there, what are the plans that the ward has. I think this again has to happen across all our cities. And in the current context, protests have become a problem because we no longer can protest. In Bangalore itself, the core areas of Bangalore, we could protest. Over a period of time, they have systematically stopped giving permissions for people to hold protests in these core parts of Bangalore, where historically we've had some amazing protests, be it women's movement, be it anything to do with greenery, waste management, the Paura Karmikas. In fact, the Paura Karmikas have had massive protests in the city, right in front of the corporation office. And then the Anganwadi workers and Asha workers and everybody. But now we have designated spaces where you can protest, where people can't see you, people can't hear you, nobody ever bothers whether you're shouting a slogan or holding a placard. So the way protests are possible today is not like before, but we definitely need to find alternative ways in which we can engage and push these possibilities. And also in the current regime, protesting is a big challenge. We are all seeing what's happening in the country. So we definitely need to find alternative ways to engage and take these issues forward.
Yeah, thank you. There is an exchange going on between Mridula, Leo, and Joseph in the chat box. You guys want to, rather than me reading all your comments, you guys want to, Leo, Joseph, Mridula, you guys want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the point that you're raising? Leo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think Bhargavi can speak to that. I just wrote a comment. If he has not read it, I can just explain.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Bhargavi, you want to, or?
No, go ahead, Leo.
Yeah.
It's it's one of the emerging problems with urban governance is that who is defining the agenda. And I think Mridula was speaking to that in terms of citing what Amitabh Bhaviskar has called bourgeois environmentalism. Of course, smart cities is the best representation of the bourgeois defining what is the new urbanism, or what, if they want to call it new. It is just capture of urban governance by a model which is tuned into neoliberal economics, wherein capital plays a major role in transformation and not necessarily representative decision making. And this serves as a huge threat to democratic processes and the capacities of communities to organize and engage with critical transformations and shape it to their desired outcomes, which obviously is not happening because, as Bhargavi has explained at length, the model which has been adopted is parastatal-led even before JNM and Smart City came. And JNM, unfortunately, the legacy of JNM, unfortunately, is Bangalore, where Janagra, for instance, promoted this model of elite capture of urbanism and urban governance. For instance, there is something called tender sure, where tenders are outsourced out of the city council decision making to uh, private entities, and Janagra decides as a so-called NGO, which gets huge chunks of money from international capital, including as grants, what project has to be invested in. Now, this is the precursor to what happened to JNM, and JNM became the basis, the foundation for smart cities. So I think there's a serious danger to the very idea of democratic governance in this whole mechanism. And the reason why I think Amitabh Bhaskar calls it bourgeois environmentalism is also the way in which the civil society space, which largely evolved out of a resistance to emergency, and therefore stressing the importance of struggles for fundamental freedoms and fundamental rights. That's the basis on which Indian civil society evolved. And it promoted, it basically worked for advancement of human rights, environment being a later cause, before that feminist cause,
Not audible.
rights, and so on. But the point is that such such basis as, I mean, of course, Bhargavi also alluded to the trade union movement, how trade unions played a critical role in shaping outcomes. So what we now see is that that space has been being increasingly captured, and the civil society, which evolved out of struggle, is actually ceding that space almost willingly by either being co-opted or collaborating, and almost without resistance. And to me, that is very worrying. So who's going to speak to the need to assert fundamental rights? We have seen that in the housing sector, we have seen it in the construction sector, we are seeing it in the labor. I mean, click activism has become the method to to ideate, to articulate, and also to represent uh, public positions, and it's quite fake actually. Uh, and we are using fake activism to replace genuine activism, and that is a very, very serious problem, and we are seeing its manifestation in the ward committees. So it's getting statutorily, it is getting embedded statutorily, it is getting embedded into critical decision making forums, and the parastatals are the most convenient thing because obviously, as Bhargavi has explained at length, uh, they are totally out of the constitutional 74th amendment. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think Joseph
Thank
wants
you.
to respond to
Yeah.
Leo.
Yeah. Is it clear? I mean, is my voice clear?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, as you know, Leo said that in the neoliberal environment or framework or whatever, it is capital which is actually the instrument of power and control. A tremendous amount of capital is actually being generated at the local level, but it's being appropriate upwards. I think it is possible using emerging appropriate technologies to actually uh, use the funds which is locally generated and to be used locally. Uh, Crudely, I will put it as saying, see, you know, it's by creating local levels, you know, circular economies. Now, local, you know, circular economies now are being cited only in the context of environmentalism. But the point is that it can also be conceptualized in the context of uh, economic benefits being um, used locally, like you know something like Elabad's Anubandh, you know that is one concept. The thing, and it is possible if it is just. I mean, if you can demonstrate one or two instances of this happening, then I mean, it can have a demonstration effect and it gets spread actually. That's all. I made my point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brudula, you want to add something? something to these comments?
I think I totally understand what Leo was saying, and my point was basically related to the two things that you'd shown about how the Coburn Park you needed IDs to go in. So that I think that's what I was referring to as bourgeois environmentalism, and the other one was related to the lakes that they'd been privatized. With what I really liked was what Bhargavi said, that because we are in a certain position of privilege, then we need to be able to subvert that and use that privilege to bring in voices of the larger sections of the society whenever we move forward, instead of what's happening otherwise, like where the concept of bourgeois environmentalism, how do you subvert that? We could just use a privilege instead to take the movement forward and take all the voices along.
Yeah, one last point. What I'm basically talking about is actually a way of sidestepping direct confrontation and to build power structures at the bottom level. See, because actually, if you can see, I mean, if you can see what's happening in India, especially in India, it's almost impossible to confront the authoritarian, hierarchies. But it is possible to build bottom up, and that is what we should do. Thank you.
Okay. Uh, I don't see any more comments, suggestions, questions in the chat box. I think so. Thank you, Pradula, Leo, and Joseph, from bringing some of these points. And I think it's about time. It's 1 o'clock, so for us to wrap the session. Thank you, Bhargavi, so much for so patiently answering all the questions, for detailed elaboration on the processes that happen in the city, engagement with local people's representatives, movements, and authorities, including the judiciary. I think that was an amazing session and quite informative, and will give a lot of us hope and inspiration to carry this work forward, and also provide us directions to take this forward. With this, I hand this over to Maju for any further announcements.
Uh, yes, tomorrow the next two sessions will be on financing of smart cities. Tomorrow we will be looking into the role of financial institutions and the financing mechanisms, and then the next section we'll be looking into municipal budgets and the impact of smart cities on municipal budgets. So tomorrow's session is at 11 a.m. I'll send a mail with the presentations of today, and also reminding you with the link to join tomorrow at 11 a.m. So that's it. At tomorrow we see at 11 a.m. Yeah,
Thank you.
we can conclude the session today.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Maju. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.